Good evening. It is Thursday, January 28th. NBA returns back. It's myself, obviously, Henry, and then our special guest, Cal, from the Baseline Podcast. Cal, how you doing? Thanks for joining us.
What's up? What's going on, fellas? Good.
Not much. Obviously, Raj, as we know, usual load management for the week. So, we wanted to bring our true expert in here. And Cal, we're going to be discussing pretty much just one thing today, and that's just going to be the first quarter MVP rankings. Pretty much every team has played somewhere in that like 15 to 18 to 19 game range. So we kind of have a good, like a standard or baseline of what guys are doing, production wise, what teams are kind of finally starting to settle into a rhythm. The first couple weeks have been, a little choppy. Obviously, there's been some COVID issues. We've had a lot of guys on a lot of teams, Boston, Dallas, Miami, just to name a few that have dealt with a lot of COVID, DNPs. Obviously, we had the James Harden trade, which shook up the Nets and is kind of shaking up the East there. So there's kind of a lot that's happened here, and things are pretty fluid. But this is the NBA where we start talking about the MVP after like the first week. So figured we could kind of
after the first game,
night one happens, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, so and so's Christian Wood's the MVP, stuff like that. Those are the conversations. So that we'll just kind of go into it here. First, I want to touch on like what goes into the MVP voting, because I feel like what maybe people like us three here look at is going to be a little different than what the people who actually have votes look at. Just some kind of the main notes that I compiled. Obviously, people look at regular stats, your points, rebounds, assists, etc., team success, which is important generally, other than like Russell Westbrook years and stuff like that. Usually the guys that are some of the best players on one of the top like 3 seeds in the East or West are going to be in contention. We also have some advanced stats like PER. I think somebody pointed out the other day, like 9 of the last 10 guys to lead the league in PER have won the MVP. So that's something worth noting. It's actually a reason why Jokic, I think, is like heavily favored on Basketball Reference's MVP tracker right now, because he is leading the league in that. So that's always something to keep an eye on. Obviously, guys like us, we're looking at the eye test too. Like I think we're all smart enough to kind of put those regular counting stats to the side. Just look at like what we're seeing night to night from guys, and if they're truly having an impact on the game. A big one for the media, I think, is narrative. They love, whether it's Derrick Rose being this scrawny little point guard in 2011. Believe me, I love 2011 Derrick Rose more than most people. But like that was kind of like a narrative-driven one. Obviously, Russ playing in his first year without Kevin Durant. He was kind of shouldering the load, putting up the triple doubles. Like there's situations where that narrative comes into play, and now you start seeing like a lot of stories posted about it, a lot of interviews, and the media is kind of able to push that person, whoever that is, in that kind of direction. And there's a couple too. I don't know if you guys have ever read. Some people go to church on Sundays and read the Bible. This is my Bible, which is the Book of Basketball by Bill Simmons. It's 10 years old, so it's not fully up to date. However, he does cover an MVP chapter where he goes through a lot of the past MVPs and sees if they're valid or not and why. And he has a couple of like his standards for what he looks for. And the one that I really like the most, and tell me what you guys think too, is his first question. It says, if you replaced each MVP candidate with a league average player, his position, for the entire season, what would be that like hypothetical effect on a team's record? And I think that's like a really important question, because we've seen it in years past where like obviously LeBron's got 4 MVPs, but like if you took him away from like the 09 Cavs and put like whatever the league average small forward was, like the Cavs would be terrible, but instead they're out there winning, 50, 60 plus games. And you can do that with a multitude of guys. And I think that's important too. Like I think Curry, who we're going to get to a little bit later, if you take him off the Warriors and put like the league average point guard, like say even put like D'Angelo Russell, say D'Angelo Russell was healthy and he was on there instead of Steph Curry, I don't think the Warriors are, 10-8 or whatever their record is right now. I think it's a huge drop off. I think it's the impact that Curry has each night. So, bottom line, there's a lot of different factors that go into it. We'll kind of I'll have each one of you guys, if you just want to give me like your top 5 MVP candidates, just like a brief overview of 5 to 1, and then why you might have that guy there. It doesn't have to be a huge long thing, because we'll kind of break down each player here. Cal, you're obviously our special guest, so if you want to lead us off with your top 5.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you for rolling out the red carpet for me. So my top 5, at number 5, I have Kevin Durant with the Brooklyn Nets. Number 4, I have the Philadelphia 76ers, Joel Embiid. Number 3, I have Dame Lillard. Number 2, Nikola Jokic out of Denver. And number 1, I have LeBron James. Now I know a lot of people are going to be sitting here ready to go crazy, but you're asking me who I think the MVP candidates are at this outset, which obviously means that if you're going to ask me what it might be towards the end of this year, I definitely will tell you that a couple of these guys are going to drop off this list. And we'll get into my reasonings why I believe that's the case. But if we're talking about what their numbers reflect and where their teams are and the importance of what they're doing at this very moment, I'm not going to deny guys like Joel Embiid or guys like LeBron James or even Kevin Durant, for that matter, on the impact that they're having right now in their ability to have this conversation about the MVP race.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's good. I agree with a bunch of the guys on your list, and I also agree with what you're saying. Things are it's a really fluid list. It's probably the most fluid list of any award really in sports. I feel like the NBA MVP is, even if you don't love the NBA or like watch it all the time, I think it's the most memorable one. Like, I mean, I watch football, I watch baseball. I can't tell you like the AL and NL MVPs every year. NFL, like I know guys like Brady and Manning have like 4 apiece, and Rodgers has gotten his, Mahomes obviously, but like it's hard to tell you like what year and like how their numbers and stuff like that. Like, you can tell me like the last, I can tell you the last however many MVPs since I remember watching basketball. I think it's such a widely popular award, and so yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of what changes throughout the season. Henry, if you want to go next with your list there. You're on mute, bro.
Silent but deadly.
All right. I said I'm gonna go 5-1. So
Okay.
At number 5, I already put this on the Twitter group chat, but I got Donovan Mitchell as my number 5, for several reasons, but mainly because he's the reason the Utah Jazz were able to stay as competitors after Gordon Hayward left. Not just competitors, but even more than that, they look like championship competitors. I mean, they're tied for number 1 right now with the Lakers in the West. But can Donovan Mitchell fall off? Yeah, I can see that happening. Unfortunately, but not to a credit, Shaq and what he said. And I know you guys know what he said, but I think Donovan Mitchell is a great player. He has a lot of room for improvement, which I think is going to happen. Number 4. The reason why I have this guy so high on the list is just because voter fatigue. I got LeBron at number 4. And that's literally it. Like, he can win the MVP every year, and we all know that. But it's just like once it comes down to it, to like the actual voting from the media and the coaches and everything, it's gonna come down also to voter fatigue. Like, I know he hasn't won it in a few years. Actually, it's been a while now, but they probably don't want to see LeBron get it. Is it going to be his 4th? Would it be his 4th MVP or his 5th MVP?
Fifth.
His 5th MVP. I don't think a lot of people in the league will want to see him to get his 5th MVP, even though he's playing extraordinary as a 36-year-old, which is why he's on that list. Number 3, I got Jokic, because he plays into that dynamic of what Jordan brought up in terms of like if you pull someone out from the team, how good are they? With an average player in that position. Jamal Murray can hold his own, but this regular season at least has proven how long of a stretch can he be a superstar player for. In the bubble he was, but so far in this regular season he hasn't really showed that bubble Murray that it got me excited. So I got a little disappointed. So I was like, Jokic is by far the best player on that Nuggets team. He's putting up, he's almost averaging a triple-double too. 2, I got Joel Embiid, and last season I thought to myself, I'm probably never going to see Joel Embiid as an MVP candidate, just because the process seems to keep like dwindling down as the years go by, and that's not only is that bad obviously it's bad for the team, but that's bad for him, but he was putting up like crazy numbers. He's averaging 27 points, 11 rebounds on 58% shooting, on 54% shooting. So Joel Embiid right now, he took a massive step in terms of like what he's trying to prove. He's trying to prove, 1, the Sixers are competitors, and 2, that they're no fluke. They're 10-0 with that starting lineup. They have the best record in the East, which is a lot to say. They beat your guys' Lakers, Jordan. I know
I was hoping we'd get through this without you saying
it's pretty funny, you got which was kind of like a revenge matchup between Danny Green, Dwight Howard, and their old Lakers squad. But I got Joel Embiid up there. And at number 1, I got Steph Curry, because Take Steph Curry out of the Warriors,
Mhm.
and the Warriors they are the worst team in the West, if not like if one of the worst teams in the NBA. Like we saw, especially at the beginning of the season, how much they struggled. Now, thankfully, James Wiseman is really coming on his own. Love seeing his
Mhm.
progression so early on. Kelly Oubre is playing a little better, which is great because in the beginning of the season he hit no threes and he was horrible, from the perimeter. But it just goes to show, like, wow, like Steph Curry is proving this season without a Klay Thompson, without Draymond being as consistent as we know he can be. He is not only the most valuable player on that team, but he's the definition of what it means to be the most valuable player and like what that award means. Because if you take him out from that lineup, if you take him out from that franchise, the Warriors become irrelevant again. So, and that's all
Mhm.
because like Steph Curry put that team back on the map and he kept them there solely by himself. Obviously a credit to Klay Thompson and Draymond, but right now it's all Curry. So that's why he's at my number one.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I like it, and I think
Bless you, Henry, man. Because what you just said is exactly has been the argument for why we have this back and forth banter about what it means to be an MVP and what the criteria should be. This has always been the argument. It's why guys like Steph Curry have been ostracized in the years that they won their MVP awards, during years that LeBron James was clearly like a top person at that time for him as well too, because
Yeah.
that's one of those particular arguments. And I'm not saying it to diss you or nothing like that. I'm just saying
Oh yeah.
exactly the reason why we say these things and we have this kind of conversation in doing so, because when do you get to a point where you really recognize when you say he is the most valuable player, not just on his team, but to the league, because of the fact that if you removed him from that team will never do well, right? Will never be as good. I will say this though, and it will be the reason why I don't have Steph Curry in my top 5. If you look at his numbers, he is not shooting the ball as good as his years that he did win the MVP. And I think this is part of the problem sometimes when we put guys in the MVP picture, guys like Embiid and things of that nature. When you have guys who have already put numbers up to that kind of level, how do you take what this person's doing individually in that season and match that up to the years of guys playing in that same position who are putting those numbers up already and are not being considered as MVP candidates, like Giannis Antetokounmpo? So that's part of the reason why, to me, it brings up an interesting way to how we look at the question: is he an MVP person that can sustain doing this all the way through to the end of the season, or is it just eye candy for right now in the moment?
I like that you bring that up actually, because I feel like just the term MVP is very skewed and there needs to be, a definite definition to it, because there's a lot of factors that play into it. Like for example, the 2017 Russell Westbrook, the OKC Thunder, they finished like 7th in the West, and Russell Westbrook still came out with the MVP award. Why? Because one, the narrative. Two, because he averaged a triple double for the first time since Oscar Robertson. So those were two things that, but he's not a top. They're not a top team in the West. We can make the same case for, let's say, Bradley Beal right now. He's averaging 34 points. He's averaging 34 points a game, but his team's not winning. There's really no narrative to it and everything. But if you take him out, the Wizards are going to get even worse than that. But he is kind of like, how can you say like, oh, like a player that's averaging 34 points per game, how are they not in the MVP candidate race, or at least talk, And that's because I think it's just the definition. I think we just first need to define what is an MVP, like Jordan, like what's your best definition? I love that you brought up your book. But to you, at least, like what would you say is the main factor to determining who the MVP is?
Well, for the record, this is why I wanted to have just a MVP focused stream, because I knew we could have discussions like this, as opposed to trying to like squeeze it into like a regular show. Yeah, I mean, both of you make great points, and that is kind of the thing, right? We need to nail down. There needs to be like, written on the wall, hey, this is what it means to be an MVP. I mean, to me, I definitely agree with like the part of like, if you didn't have, Curry on the Warriors and you had a league average guy, what would the words look like? They'd be a lot worse. So like that plays into it. I mean, a big thing for me is always the eye test. Like if I'm watching the games enough every night, I can see if a certain player is impacting his team, impacting the game, and impacting the team winning more so than other players might be. You might see certain teams playing really, really well, but like for example, like Giannis, like to me, yes, he's had two statistically amazing years. But I think like even watching the games this year, like he's got enough around him, like between Drew and Middleton and those guys, like, and they have a good system in place for regular season wins. But like, and he is obviously impacting the game, but like I feel like they could still win a decent amount of games if he wasn't as big a part of their offense, or if he wasn't on the team. Like I still think they'd be okay. So it's tough. I mean, on the spot, I don't have like a set like two sentences of what the MVP should mean. But I think kind of as we delve in more to these guys, maybe we'll be able to come up with, a more clear definition. Obviously, Cal, I know you have some thoughts on Embiid. I have some thoughts on Curry. Real before we get into like the big names, let's kind of cut, there's a couple guys I think nobody mentioned that are, and I think other years, maybe, you go back 10 years when the league wasn't as talented. They might be a little more, I guess their name would be out there a little bit more. So some guys that had to just kind of miss the cut. Kawhi and Paul George. Clippers are obviously off to a great start. Kawhi is doing Kawhi things. Paul George so far has played some of his best basketball that we've seen in a long time, especially after the bubble. I think it's hard though when you have two guys playing so well on the same team, they kind of cancel. Sometimes they can cancel each other out in the sense of like that one person's taking the spotlight. I had Donovan Mitchell on my list personally, guys, just missing the cut. I feel like it was definitely worth to give him a shout out because, the Jazz are playing so well, even though his numbers aren't like anything to write home about. They're nothing, he's not having like scoring 30 points a game or doing anything crazy like that. And Henry, you can probably make your case for him when we get, a little bit down the road here. And then even like guys like Anthony Davis, who I think has been kind of sluggish to start the year. Everybody kind of had him in the top 5 discussion to start. I think he can work his way back into it, but it's going to be tough, especially with LeBron playing pretty well. And then, even guys like Harden was kind of nullified. I mean, for me, he was nullified the second he started whining about the Houston trade. But then once he got traded to Brooklyn, I think that kind of nullifies it too. And that's going to be an issue with Durant playing with those two guys the rest of the year. So let me just pull up the list here, and we'll kind of start at the bottom. Let's start with Giannis, just because I feel like none of us really touched on him. He is quietly, 2-time reigning MVP. He had 2 historical seasons statistically in terms of like the production, especially per minute, because Budenholzer was barely playing him 32, 33 minutes a game and is still doing the same this year. The Bucks obviously dominated those years in the regular season, fell short for various reasons in the postseason. This year he's 27-7, 55% in the field, 30% from 3, which is, I think it's almost safe to say at this point he's never going to really develop that shot to the level that we wanted to. I remember like 2 years ago we were like, man, if he just develops an outside shot of like 37% or something like that, he's going to be literally the most unstoppable player we've ever seen. I don't think it's going to happen. The shooting struggles are evident by the fact that he's shooting 58% from the foul line. He's turned the ball over 4 times a game too, which is a little bit higher than I think I'd like to see, especially from a guy like him who it seems like he's so hard to stop. When he puts his head down and goes to the rim. Bucks are 11-6. They're second in the East. One thing that I've heard a lot of people talk about, and I thought it was interesting, is we've wanted him to kind of take the reins from LeBron, right, and be the next, dominant wing. And it seems like he's more like a Shaq. And I thought that was interesting that somebody said that the other day. I forget what podcast it was, but they said he's more like a Shaq, right? Like physically imposing, can really dominate these regular seasons and put up a lot of wow numbers. Obviously the dunks and the blocks and everything like that are impressive, but has a couple of like not fatal flaws, but really big flaws that stand out to you that cause struggles, in the postseason and at the end of games. I mean, if I watched the Bucks next last week when that game went down to the wire there between Harden and Middleton trading jumpers. And when Durant hit that jumper to put him up 2 with like 3 seconds left, I was like, okay, so they're probably going to go for a 3 or they're going to have to go for like a contested jumper. And I said, so it's got to go to Middleton. There's no way like the play can go to Giannis unless he somehow gets free to the rim. And I just think that's really concerning for a guy who we have, supposed to be like a top 5 player in this league. The fact that like he can't be counted on late in games unless it's like tied and he has the ball at the top of the key and he can just kind of do what he wants. I think that kind of limits him. Where do you guys stand on like him, maybe his overall development? Do you think he could work his way into like this top 5 of the MVP rankings. I personally think the voter fatigue's there, and I don't think he has a shot. But I'm interested to hear kind of your guys' quick thoughts on Giannis, if either one, if you want to start.
Cal, please. Did he say me? I'll just go. I think he's frozen. But I guess my biggest problem with Giannis is he can't keep up with the evolution of the league. Because Jordan, you and I love to talk about 10 years ago when things were different. And I think it's a great comparison because 10 years ago we didn't see this many big men shooting from the perimeter. Now we see Jokic, Embiid, Anthony Davis, all these bigs that are able to shoot from the perimeter and extend their games. Giannis hasn't been able to do that. He's tried, but how many times is he far left in air balls? A lot of times. And then when you go 1 for 10 from the free throw line, that just exposes another hole in your game. So it's like, okay, what else can you do besides drive and dunk? Because right now, last season he averaged 29 points a game. This season he's averaging 26 and 11. Still great numbers, but obviously, dipped a little bit. But I think it's just that it's going to come down to voter fatigue and also just seeing the real holes in his game. Like, okay, if Giannis had a jump shot, a consistent one, he'd be the most unfair player in NBA history. But that's not the case. As long as, he keeps himself stagnated with the jump shot and, he keeps airballing and he keeps becoming being a liability from the free throw line, then that doesn't make him the best player in the league. I mean, the best player in the league, at the end of the day can do a little bit of everything. But I think that's the only thing with Giannis is still a generational talent. I think we can all agree on that. But that's it. As long as if he can develop that jump shot, he's like who really is a unicorn. But right now he's just a freak that we wish can do better, than just dunk.
Cal, any thoughts on Giannis?
It's just amazing how far we've come, in the evolution of watching a game of basketball, that I think fans have a level of impatience with a player who goes out and does exactly what you want him to do, which is to be the highlight reel, to be one of the most exciting players in the game of basketball. He's basically has done that the last 2 seasons. Now, I just simply believe that the reason why he is not going to win MVP is because he's not going to be able to replicate what he gave you last season, which is his ability to be one of the best defenders while being one of the most dominant offensive players for a team that would have been trending to win 60 basketball games plus, right? Had it not been for the pandemic. And so my thing is, I kind of liken this to the way that we looked at LeBron James. LeBron James at one point in his young career was one of the most dominant players. And then what was the thing that we kept asking him to do? He needs to learn to shoot the basketball. He needs to shoot the ball better. He needs to shoot from distance. Whereas he was willing to go down low and willing to be the most dominant point forward in the game of basketball in the NBA. But we have, fan fatigue about, popularity and the way that the guy plays. I think Giannis, the reason why he won't win another MVP is he's doing a disservice to what makes him as great a player. And I guess it's weird that everyone's liking or trying to make that comparison to him with Shaq, because the reason why you can't make that comparison is the moment that Giannis has now dedicated himself to try to build on shooting. I'm not saying that he should not improve and get a jump shot. He's going to need that if he wants to be a champion. He's going to have his game evolved to be a champion, not to be an MVP. If he wants to be an MVP, he needs to go out and be the most dominant player in the game of basketball, which is what he's not doing at the moment. And you can attribute that as well, too, because the Milwaukee Bucks recognize that he cannot win it on his own. Because we have super teams, he needs guys out there that he can give the ball to, that he can facilitate to. So the guys like Chris Middleton and Jrue Holiday, they're going to have to step up. And if Giannis is passionate about winning a championship, it means that he's going to have to give up the aspirations of being an MVP, because we've already seen what that MVP player looks like, and it wasn't good enough to win a championship. So that, to me, is the argument I would kind of make with regards to Giannis Antetokounmpo. The numbers are impressive, but he set himself at such a high standard that now that he is trying to change the way that he's playing the game, it means that a lot of those numbers that we were in awe about, that we were enamored with, don't measure up to the standard of what we're now saying should be what an MVP candidate is going to look like. And maybe that's a good thing for Giannis. right? But I say it's a bad thing because he will not be the most dominant player in the game, which is what I think he needs for himself to stay in that conversation.
Okay, that's cool. And I really like what you said about like almost the difference between playing a certain way to win MVP and playing another way and adding things to your game to be a champion. I think that's two important distinctions to make. And obviously Giannis has expressed that he obviously wants to win, just like everybody else in this league. And that, he said he's willing to do whatever it takes. So it'll be interesting to see if he's able to get there. I have a little bit less confidence in that championship thing for him after kind of seeing what he's doing this year. But you never know. We've seen guys make a lot of leaps. You talk about LeBron. I mean, LeBron, got in the post after all those years and is now absolutely lethal there and has developed an outside shot along the way. He's shooting a career high from three. But we'll get into LeBron obviously in a little bit. He's more towards the top. Cal, we can talk about your guy who you have. I think you had him third? Where is he? Yeah, third. You had Damian Lillard third. They're actually playing Houston right now on TNT. They're 9-7 currently, which is good for fifth in the West. Unfortunately, he's playing without CJ for a couple weeks, which is a shame because CJ is playing some of his best basketball of his career. CJ McCollum, that is. But Lillard in the season, he's 29, 7-5, 45% from the field, 37% from three. Kind of just plugging along, doing Dame Lillard things. Basically, since CJ went down a week ago, he's 33-8. So he's doing the usual, I'm going to step up. I'm going to play a bigger role. I'm going to, shoulder more of the burden. I love Dame. I've loved Dame since he's come into the league. And I think it's interesting, the fact that Portland is doing so well. They have, an interesting team that they put together, right? You have, Nurkic is out as well. So that kind of stinks. So they're kind of dealing with like Cantor and some other guys at center who aren't really serviceable on defense. They're just kind of one-trick ponies there. Their wings are a little bit weak. Melo is obviously nice, but he's older. Rodney Hood's coming off the Achilles, and then that's kind of it. So Dame's shouldering a lot of the load there, which I think is important. I think he's been someone who doesn't quite get as much love for MVP conversations over the last couple of years, even though he's had to do a lot with not always the most help. Cal, I'll flip it back to you since you had him on the list. Why do you have him at 3 like so high? And then, where could you see him go on the rest of the year?
It's Dame time, simply put. I
like it.
Yeah, listen, there's a reason why people say that him and CJ McCollum are arguably the best backcourt in the NBA, and you can extract that, however you want, even if the Golden State Warriors get back Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. To me, Damian Lillard has always played with a chip on his shoulder. I think the biggest chip that he plays with is the amount of disrespect to not acknowledge how lethal a player he is. And this is as good an opportunity I think you will see for Damian Lillard to kind of really make a statement. Now, is he going to win MVP? That's really hard to say because it would literally take CJ McCollum to come back and, be a shell of himself. And, Yusuf Nurkic will have to be gone for the rest of this season. And then we're right back to this conversation about what's going to take for the Portland Trailblazers to be a viable team to be contenders, right? And I always go back to this one thing, that it's just basically going to take Damian Lillard having a completely altered ego in the way that he has to play with such freakish guard-like ability to put himself in this kind of conversation. And I think right now you're kind of seeing it, where he is giving you a different look on the way he plays the game. He makes it look so easy, right? Like how he's scoring, how he's getting to the basket, how he's finding his shot. And even if he's only playing with, half a Melo and a couple of Cantors on the court, he's still making the Portland Trailblazers a competitive basketball team. And I will say this, if Dame is able to keep this up throughout the course of the season and the Portland Trailblazers are somewhere in the mix as far as being a top 2 team in the Northwest Division, possibly a top 4 team in the Western Conference with a very good overall record, it would be hard to imagine why his name would not be in high consideration as an MVP candidate. But as of right now, the numbers he's putting up is just, to me, it's kind of ridiculous. And it's in the way that he is doing it, to me, I think that stands out. To your point, everyone just looks at those numbers and say, that's Dame doing this thing. But really look at the numbers and look at the way that he's doing it. I think he's making, listen, we came up with oh, Steph Curry is making it look so effortless, right? There's a reason why everyone loves seeing that matchup between the Trailblazers and the Golden State Warriors, because Damian Lillard has not only taken that freakish way of shooting the basketball and just, finding his game and exploding on teams. He just does it with ease. Like, he could just sit here, shoot a 3 from 40 feet and then go back to the bench and spit a hot 16 before, Coach Stotts come back in. That's how Dame wants to play the game. And to me, that is part of the fashionista way that we're looking at MVP candidacy at times. And he's just in that moment.
I like that. And I think, unfortunately, as you kind of pointed out, he does have a chip on his shoulder because I think he is underappreciated. I think every generation of players, unfortunately, every decade or so gets, one guy who's supremely underappreciated that we're going to look back on and be like, wow, like, why didn't he get why didn't he get enough love, whether it's all-star games, all NBAs, MVPs, stuff like that. And I think Dame, unfortunately, for whatever reason, whether it's the fact that he plays in Portland and not Los Angeles, whether the fact that he's not had a super team, which he's been so vocal and I love. He said, I'm not looking to team up with 3-4 other guys that are stars to try and win. He's like, I want to do it, my way. I want to do it the right way. But I think unfortunately it's costing him in some other areas. I think that'll be like the first thing on this. I would assume he makes the Hall of Fame as long as he keeps this up for another year or two.
I want to throw one real quick thing in out of my list of the top fives here. Okay, minus LeBron James, because LeBron James to me is the outlier. Damian Lillard is the only, and Kevin Durant. Damian Lillard, though, to me is the only one who I have more confidence in, that when he's put in marquee matchup situations, that he's going to show up and he's going to play big. Unless he is suffering some catastrophe, injury, something, whatever, he's going to go in there and he's going to put up big numbers. He's not afraid of the moment, and he's not afraid of who he's playing against because of that respect factor and that chip on his shoulder. I have more confidence in him, and that to me is part of my biggest criteria that I look at MVP candidates. Like, are these guys putting up numbers against their contemporaries who are not only former MVP, but are the current, running theme to why we're watching the game of basketball? So I look at how Embiid plays against LeBron James, and I look at how Durant plays against LeBron James, or how Anthony Davis plays against Joel Embiid and things of that nature. Like, I look at these matchups and I say to myself, if all you're doing is beating up on guys that just become a mismatch, like Embiid plays against the Celtics, where his numbers look so gaudy because all he does is play the Celtics, that doesn't sell me that you're an MVP candidate. Show me what you really are when you play against the Lakers. Show me what you really are when you play against the Denver Nuggets, and you have a sizable matchup where you should be able to defend against Jokic. And if Jokic is putting a triple-double on you, you're not in my MVP conversation, right? Your whole point is you're supposed to play on both ends of the court. So that's one of the things that I really look at when I look at these guys, and that's why I like Dame Lillard, because he always seems to show up against his contemporaries in big games.
Henry,
to piggyback what you were saying right now, like, now that you brought up this point, I love Damian Lillard. I think he's one of the most underappreciated athletes in North American sports. I'm not talking about just the NBA, but just in general, because he's done a lot, not just for the franchise, but for the city. But aside from that, to your point, remember what happened when Damian Lillard faced off against the Warriors not too long ago? When you're talking about, like, facing your contemporaries, what happened that game with Steph Curry? Steph Curry dropped 62 points on Damian Lillard's head. So, like, now that we're talking about that, like I said, I'm not talking, like, I think Damian Lillard he's averaging 28 and 7, putting up crazy numbers. But look at the team. They're 5th in the West right now. 5th in the West behind the Nuggets, the Clippers, the Lakers, and the Jazz, who all have MVP caliber players in front of him, who have better standings in the West. And now that you brought up the point of, facing your contemporaries, for some reason, the Blazers always seem to falter against the Warriors. That happened in the playoffs back in 2019 when Kevin Durant, tore when he got his quad injury first before the Achilles. What happened? They got swept with a Kevin Durant-less, Warriors team against Steph Curry. And that was when Damian Lillard was like, okay, he's supposed to pop off. This is his time to shine, and that didn't happen. And now, we're coming back here, and what happened recently with the 62 points game against the Warriors, it's just like, okay, like if this is how he's going to match up against, but I would say his other side to his coin. I would say, they're Steph Curry and Damian Lillard are both, the same players shooting, the long range ball and everything like that. But if that's going to happen, then, does Damian Lillard deserve the MVP after that? If like that's how he's going to match up against, the players that he's supposed to match up well against?
I completely agree with you. But I also will say this as well, too. Part of the reason why you do get that MVP candidacy is if you also show that you have defensive metrics on your side, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we also applauded in the years that Steph Curry won his MVP candidacy. It was that he was breaking records, right?
Yeah.
But that second year, a lot of it was also that he improved his defensive metrics. Now, whether that's because he had Kevin Durant and had Klay Thompson and Draymond Green, arguably one of the greatest teams in NBA history, that's fine. But if the numbers are there, they're there. And if it validates putting him in that conversation, it does. So all I'm saying is I agree with you 100%. Part of it is you can go out and drop 60 against, but you can't let someone drop 60 on you and still be considered, right? So, and I say that for all of these guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's going to come a point where, all right, the numbers seem to even themselves out. They're obviously the most dominant either in their position or the most dominant in their conference or the most dominant in the game right now. So what is it going to take in order to kind of put them, over the edge? It's the reason why I don't have Damian Lillard as number one. But my point is that I believe a lot more in Damian Lillard to be a better basketball player, to be a dominant basketball player, and to do more. Especially
I agree on that.
Current where the situation is with the Portland Trailblazers than most of the guys that I see and have seen on my list of the top 5.
I like that. I mean, the back. I think you guys both bring up a lot of good points, and you could probably use this as a segue to go kind of into the Curry conversation. And one last thought on Dame, like I said, I think he's super underappreciated. I think we've seen, especially in the bubble last year, he was the bubble MVP, helped Portland get into the playoffs. I mean, he was ungodly half of the field. And I think he's had a little bad luck too. I mean, he's, some of those Portland teams, yes, you can bring up the getting swept by the Kevin Durant-less Warriors, but some of the other years, he's had some untimely injuries in the playoffs too, where he hasn't been fully healthy. Even last year against the Lakers, he got banged up a little bit in that series, so he's had a little bit of bad luck there as well. But let's talk about his counterpart there in Steph. He's 28, 6-6, 45% from the field, 39% from three on 11 attempts a game, which it seems outrageous, but it's starting to be the norm for everybody. The Warriors currently they're 10-8, which is tied for 6th in the West. They're right behind Portland. So in the next day or so, they could flip flop. They're 6-4 in their last 10. They kind of got out of the gates really slow, Curry himself included. But I think the thing with Curry is the argument that I would make is that he's obviously playing phenomenal basketball on par or close to on par with his MVP seasons, and just the fact that he's playing with, while they're not like necessarily like a bunch of scrubs, they're Kelly Oubre is like kind of good at like one or two things only and stinks at a couple other things. Andrew Wiggins is putting up actually surprisingly decent shooting numbers, but is not a guy that I would consider like anywhere near elite in this league and has a lot of flaws. Draymond is essentially like Dennis Rodman, but like a slightly better shooter, but not by much. His shot has basically gone downhill for the last 3 years. And he's starting to age quickly. And then obviously they have Wiseman as a rookie, and then their bench is just, a throw a bunch of, guy, Damian Lee, Pascal, stuff like that. Not really anybody to write home about. What was that?
Wanamaker.
Yeah, former Celtics great Brad Wanamaker.
Don't be hating on Wanamaker, man.
No, he's actually been okay.
He's been solid.
But obviously Curry had the 62-point game against Portland. Kind of after it was a culmination of like all the Twitter slander everyone was having, almost the Dame Steph argument, right? They were saying Dame's the best point guard in the league. Steph's starting to look a little washed. They're struggling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think Steph finally kind of was like, all right, enough's enough. Like, I'm going to show you what I can do. And they seem to have been playing really well after that. The one thing that I will say that I think Steph deserves credit for, and Dame's had this at times too, but Steph, it just seems like every time I turn them on, he's getting like double and triple teamed on this court. Teams are keying on him like it's an AAU middle school game, and the coach is like, look, guys, just take this guy out, and maybe we have a chance at winning the game. And he's still able, it seems like, to get open, to get his shot off when he's navigating pick and rolls. He's done it a couple times last week to San Antonio and a couple other teams where he's coming off the screen, fakes like he's going to shoot the three, gets the center who's obviously overcommitted in the air, and then he's getting to the lane, he's finishing, he's dishing out to guys for threes. He's really seems to be masterfully in control of everything on that offensive end. Henry, I'll go to you since you seem like you're a little bit more pro Steph Curry. What are your thoughts on him so far to start the year? Did you have him in your top 5?
Yeah, he's actually at my num's number 1.
He's number 1. Okay, yeah. So this is your guy. So I mean, make the case. The floor is yours.
I will make the case. It's to that point, Jordan. Well, that being one of the main points from your book that you brought up. One, the whole if you take him out from the Warriors, he with his hand injury yesterday, last season, we were able to see like, okay, the Warriors are a horrible team without Steph Curry. They are completely lost. Now, I know they started off slowly, but it took Steph Curry like to learn how to play with all these new players with Kelly Oubre, James Wiseman, and try to find his spacing on the floor, especially coming off an injury and not playing months of basketball. So credit to him that he's been able to bounce back. Not quickly because he struggled a bit in the beginning, but he's playing the same Steph Curry basketball that I haven't seen, that I think we got robbed off for 2 years, ever since Kevin Durant joined that team a few years back. But I haven't seen Steph Curry play this type of basketball since his MVP season. Like, he's doing some incredible things that brings me back to like, now we're talking about the eye candy thing, that brings me back to like, this guy is the reason why so many dudes are pulling up, from 10 feet behind the arc, why Trae Young is pulling up from there, why Damian Lillard is pulling up from there, because he wasn't doing that before Steph Curry. Steph Curry was the first one to start that, and that when he started revolutionizing the league. And I really also think of like, what is this player's like full impact on the league? Steph Curry, I think besides LeBron, is the face of the league. Especially during his MVP years, he was becoming like, when LeBron leaves, Steph Curry's league, and like, I'm not saying like, right now
LeBron just refuses to age and hasn't left yet. I think if it was another superstar like 10 years ago, it would be totally Curry's league for the record.
Hey, look, man, like I would be with Kyle and be like, look, LeBron deserves MVP every year for being just a cyborg and just being able to keep up with. I think he's probably the first athlete to see that like this guy is beating father time, and it's absolutely crazy to see what he can do at age 36, especially when you see that that gray starting to grow on his beard. I'm like, okay, this guy should be slowing down just a bit, but nah, that hasn't happened yet. But back to Steph Curry, he
speed of light. That's all that is.
Back to Steph Curry, he's averaging 27 points or almost 28 points and 6 assists. Shooting 39% from 3. I know it's not his best shooting performance from beyond the arc, but he's put this team on his back in pace to be probably top 5, if not top 4 in the West, especially because they came back. And what Steve Kerr is going to have to do? He had to do a little bit more coaching this season, which is okay. I know he had a little bit easier with Kevin Durant back in those days, but Steph Curry has shown like, hey, like, I'm not washed. Jordan, we had this conversation on the podcast the other day. Steph Curry saw all the comments. He saw all that stuff. He's like, I am the guy that broke my own record for threes season after season after season. He just passed Reggie Miller in the all-time three-pointers list, and he's going to be the greatest three-point shooter of all time when it's all said and done, which if he's not already. So it's like, Steph Curry, that's my case. Like, he brought back that eye candy for fans in terms of like, this guy revolutionized the league in the 2010s. I know that whole decade belonged to LeBron because he went to, so many finals that season or throughout that span. But Steph Curry came in as the scrawny kid that everybody outed, but just some way, somehow found his knack and revolutionized the game and just kept that going. And now he's back to an old shape that I haven't been able to see since his MVP season. So that's my thoughts on Steph Curry.
I like it, and I agree. I agree with your point, especially with the part of like, if you had like, like I mentioned earlier, if you had like D'Angelo Russell or somebody who's like kind of league average at the guard spot for them, I think they'd really be in trouble. And you can say that about a lot of guys. I don't care, LeBron, a lot of the guys at the top of this list. But I just think with the Warriors, like when he goes to sit down on the bench and some of those other guys come in, I'm like, yikes! It's not really easy to watch. Cal, you've obviously made your objections maybe to Steph maybe being as high. Do you have anything that you would say like positively in his favor, or is it just like
No, I mean, and to be honest with you, I think that the only reason why Steph Curry probably will not win it is because of the numbers that other guys are probably going to wind up putting up this year.
Mhm.
And that might just put him in a space where, man, do we harken back to what Steph gave us in his MVP years? Because we have like that kind of mentality at times, and I'm not saying, when I say we, I'm not necessarily saying us. I'm just saying how it's being interpreted amongst the league and those who are going to vote for him to be in contention or to be a candidate for MVP. My whole thing is that right now his numbers don't marry up with the level of dominance that I think we would be used to seeing in a Steph Curry MVP, candidate scenario right now at this moment. It's not to say that he can't finish putting those numbers up, but
Mhm.
I mean, you can make the same argument with, hey, Kevin Durant right now is on pace to probably be the most efficient scorer in NBA history, and
Crazy.
and it's crazy because now he's playing next to a 3-time NBA scoring champion in James Harden, and yet he seems to be the one who takes the less shots and scores as many points as James Harden. So these are the kind of metrics that I think now that we've got PER and we've got all of these other analytics that we're trying to dive in and dig real deep into and stuff like that. It puts new people on the map on who you consider to be MVP. And I think that field was narrower if it was Steph Curry a few years ago. I think now that field has broadened itself and expanded. And if you're Steph Curry, what do you do to separate yourself, not just amongst those who play your position, but also amongst your contemporaries, your MVP contemporaries, to put yourself in that conversation, to put yourself on top? And I think part of that is we may not be used to seeing that Steph Curry that Henry's been talking about that's been missing for the last few years, because Steph Curry's had to change the way that he played the game to facilitate more opportunities for him to win championships. Now we're looking at a different version of Steph Curry in a different era of how MVP analytics are going to be used to determine who's going to wind up hoisting that award.
I like that, and I agree. And Henry, I know you have a comment too.
No, yeah, go ahead.
I do agree with that, but I think one thing that Steph does not necessarily get enough credit for, and we talked about this, Henry and Ashburn and I, a week or two ago, is that just what a universally great teammate he is. You talk about sacrificing a lot of those individual numbers. I mean, I don't think that there's probably not a lot of superstars that could have just integrated Kevin Durant into their system so flawlessly. I mean, most super teams take a year or two to get going, and the Warriors, obviously, that 2016-17 team was one of the 3 or 4 best teams I've ever seen play in my lifetime. And a huge reason was that Steph was just like, hey, look, I can still score and I can still be efficient, still do my thing, and I'm happy to help, let you kind of be the guy down the stretch at times, and let you, because Kevin Durant obviously plays a certain way with some of the ISO post-ups, which you wouldn't think would go with the Warriors offense the way that Steve Kerr likes to run it. But Curry, I think, was phenomenal in that transition. And while, again, he didn't really have a shot at winning any MVPs during those years, it resulted in back-to-back championships. And I think if you ask Steph, he's going to trade those he's going to take those championships over the MVPs any day. Henry, did you have a comment on Curry before we move on?
Yeah, just real quick, just the whole Cal, you bring up great points. I think that MVP candidates do need to show that they can beat their contemporaries, not just the players in their same position. With that being said, what did Steph Curry do against the Lakers when they faced time for the first time in the season? He completely took over that game. He hit that shot over Anthony Davis. That was, like I said, I know we can't always say like, oh, that reminds me. I know, like I keep saying like, oh, that reminds me of the old Curry, the MVP Curry. The reason why I say that is because there is a gap in between that I get. Like, I'm always gonna say this: we got robbed of multiple MVPs from that man after 2016. So like now that person is back, and he's 1, beating his contemporaries, 2, putting up his best numbers since that MVP season that I keep talking about, and 3, doing it in a way, in a fashion that is appealable to voters. So that's like my final case, but I love that you bring that up in terms of like these players got to beat their MVP candidate, oppositions in order to, to win the award.
Well, it's still early. Again, we're only a quarter into a shortened NBA season. It'll be interesting to see who would need those extra 10 games. You know, if we're saying that it's really really close on us trying to determine who's going to wind up being the MVP. There's some guys I don't think that they need that, right? Like I don't think if Steph Curry is going to be phenomenal, he doesn't need an extra 10 games. I don't think James needs an extra 10 games. I don't think that I had Luka Doncic as a dark horse candidate, and if the Dallas Mavericks, turn things around and own that Southwest division, he's one of those few guys who I just don't think that needs 10 games because he's basically a walking triple double, right? Essentially. I don't think that Kevin Durant needs 10 games. Guys who I think they need the full season to prove to me that they're MVP candidates. Joel Embiid, Dame Lillard, Nikola Jokic, they need it, right? Because they've not been there. Maybe Giannis, but that's only because, again, NBA, MVP fatigue. That really all it is that we're counting against him. But I think he's earned his stripes where he wouldn't need the whole if he just suddenly just flips the script and starts going Shaq on everybody and just dominates the whole league once more again. Right? So there are a few guys who I think they need the full gamut to prove to us that Donovan Mitchell, he's going to need the whole 72 games to prove that he's NBA MVP worthy. And so it's going to be interesting. But to your point though, Henry, Steph Curry is one of the few people who I don't think he needs that. If he turns it on, it's really hard to turn it off for that dude. And he will easily stay in that conversation if he's able to and if he chooses to.
Henry just wanted to pour salt in the wound about the Lakers blowing that lead last week.
I got to sneak that in for Jordan just a little bit.
I've never disliked him, so it's okay. Let's switch over to the East. Obviously we're running up on 50 minutes here, so I don't want to keep you guys all night, but let's kind of do a twofer here with the two guys that we have left from the East, and that's Kevin Durant and Embiid. Kevin Durant, obviously, back after that Achilles tear, playing. I don't think he can be playing really any better, especially coming off that injury. So that's one, good for the game of basketball. Having him and Curry back playing at a high level it makes every night more fun. But Durant for the season, 31, 8, and 6, 52% from the field, 44% from the three. He's actually having an off year from the foul line, only 86%, but I'm sure that'll change. You can make an argument he's one of the three best players in the world. The Nets right now got off to kind of like a quietly shaky start because I think they had some, trying to figure out some lineups situations. We had the Kyrie thing as well, where he missed about a week or two. But they're 12-8, they're fourth in the East, but they're on the rise. They're 7-3 in their last 10. Obviously, their big news, they traded for James Harden. My quick thoughts on KD are just that I think had they not traded for Harden and just kept on their path, I think that I would have him, firmly in this list. Yep. And rising throughout the whole year and potentially really in contention at the end. However, I'm one of those people, like when you get like, now you have Kyrie, now you have James Harden, now you have KD, assuming everybody's healthy and playing most nights, it's kind of tough for me to put a guy in like the top tier of the MVP conversation. It's kind of like when LeBron went to Miami. I was like, okay, well, like no offense, but like this guy should be, at least for a year, he should be out of the MVP rankings because he's kind of like, he's playing with two other supremely talented guys. So I feel like that's going to affect Durant's case as well, especially maybe from the media standpoint. Henry, if you want to go first, just give some quick thoughts on KD. What you think of him so far?
Yeah, I agree with you. He would be on my list if the James Harden trade never happened, because now he's playing alongside a three-time scoring champ and then a former NBA champion himself, Kyrie Irving. So it's just, even though he's having the comeback season of the year. Like after coming back from an Achilles injury, which is one of the most gruesome injuries you can have in the NBA, you shouldn't be able to play to that same level, if not more. And Kevin Durant's doing that right out of the gates, which is one, great for the game of basketball, like Jordan said, and two, really showed that his game never relied on athleticism. We all knew the type of person and the type of athlete he was. He was the type of player that, he can play with his back to the basket. He can shoot, but it just goes to show how dynamic of a player he is and how he can keep himself not only relevant, but to the same level that really puts him in the MVP talks. After such a gruesome injury, he would be in my list if it wasn't for James Harden being on the team. I think that whole dynamic plays into it well. What Jordan said about the whole Miami Heat example, like he's just playing with two other superstars. So that's literally the only reason why I don't have him on the list. But aside from that, he's one of the scariest, most efficient players to ever bounce of basketball in the league. And Cal, like, I know he's on your list. I would love to hear, everything you have to say about Kevin Durant.
Yeah, I mean, well, as far as I'm concerned, the reason why I have him as top 5 in the top 5 is if you look at his numbers are eerily kind of similar to what he did when he won the MVP back in 2014. So, and he's doing it playing next to arguably, two guys that are top 10 players in the NBA, which actually enhances the viability of why he is going to be or should be considered as a valuable player, like one of the most valuable players for a Brooklyn Nets team that everybody is expecting to go to the NBA Finals, who they think should be better than the Los Angeles Lakers, right? So the funny thing about this is Kevin Durant, to me, is the best player when he is not being tasked to be a leader. But this could very well be the reason why he wins the MVP, because for the Brooklyn Nets to be as good, and if anything, get themselves to possibly the NBA Finals, the best version of that team is how Kevin Durant is currently playing for that team, right? And to me, that are intangibles that I think are going to wind up being thrown into the mix when we get down the wire. We're tugging and pulling and we're figuring out who are the last 3 guys standing to have this conversation about being an MVP. Kevin Durant just keeps putting the numbers that he's putting up right now. You're going to be looking at, will the Brooklyn Nets have improved defensively? Is Kevin Durant a reason for that? The Brooklyn Nets go on stretch runs of, 8, 9, 10 games. What were Durant's numbers during those stretches? I know everybody is going to be looking at James Harden. They're going to be looking at at Kyrie Irving, but I think people should pay attention and focus at the efficiency and the influence that Kevin Durant is actually having on that team, his leadership qualities. Like, these are some of the subtle things that I think will get discussed, because I think part of that conversation is what led us to leaning more towards Giannis Antetokounmpo and him being an MVP candidate 2 years in a row, right? It was that possessiveness, that desire to be great and to stand out, where at times LeBron James, I think, decided to take a step back, where LeBron James was more focused on getting his team right in order to be ready to make that championship run. It was all about what we were seeing from Giannis. He was setting the tone. So it will be interesting to see what tone Kevin Durant chooses to set in this particular situation right now as an MVP candidate, possibly.
And I like what you said about the Nets. If they can improve defensively, if they're able to do that, which remains to be seen, it will be because of Durant. There's no spoilers. Like, James Harden and Kyrie aren't getting any better defensively. It's just not going to happen. They traded away their best defensive big guy because DeAndre Jordan's been kind of quietly not so good for a couple of years, but they traded Jared Allen, who was their ultimate rim protector. And so I think it's going to rely on Durant if they move him playing, closing out games, if he plays the 5 more, is able to guard some guys there, and is just able. I mean, he's 6'11", with that huge wingspan. If he's able to just disrupt passing lanes, provide that help defense, kind of like he did with Golden State. They played him at the 5 a lot during his time there, and he was exceptional. On that end. So that'll be, I think, that'll be one thing that could keep him in that conversation. I'd be interested to see if he's able to do that long term. Obviously, knock on wood, you hope that he stays healthy as well. But so far, all signs point to him being good to go. So it'll be definitely interesting to see how that dynamic plays out. Plus, just, him, Kyrie, Harden, that's 3 guys who generally need the ball in their hands a lot. Although KD is the guy that can, he doesn't, as you said, he's the guy still scoring a ton of points without maybe shooting as many times as you would think he would need to get those points, which just speaks to his insane ability to be so efficient. And we'll flip over to the guy that he's probably, chasing in Embiid right now. I'm definitely chasing him in the standings. Embiid's kind of having maybe not statistically his best season, because Cal, as you pointed out before he came on, he's 28, 11, and 3. Like, he's done that before. But he does have the Sixers right now. They're 13-6. They just beat the Lakers last night in a close one, so they're first in the East. It is a career high in points. It's career high in steals, which is interesting, and also a career high in field goal percentage. It's his first time ever over 50%, which I found surprising. But then it wasn't surprising when I thought about it, because I'm like, well, this guy has been he's dominant when he gets in that 5-6 feet range. It's almost Shaq-like, right? It's all automatic 2 points, so you're fouling him, especially with his footwork and his pump fakes and stuff. He's able to get to the line as well, but he's never been in quite the shape that he is in now. And so as games have worn on in the past, he started to pop out and shoot these threes and contested jumpers because he doesn't want to do the dirty work inside. Well, it seems like that's changed this year because he's just been assertive. I mean, I watched the Lakers game last night, and from the get-go, it's just down in the post, and it's just bucket after bucket, or you have to foul him. The one thing, too, that I think is telling and maybe could help swing things in Embiid's favor if he's able to keep this up is that the Sixers he's plus, I think, 12 points per 100 possessions when he's on the court. And when he goes to the bench, man, it just seems like the Sixers lose all sense of like what they're doing. And they, I don't know what their minus stats are when he's off the court, but I know it's in the negative and it's not good. So I think that is something that is interesting about him. The one thing also is, could play against him down the stretch as we get later in the season is that he has already missed 4 games. It is a shortened 72-game season. So, you get to that point where he starts, if he's missing, 8, 9, 10 games, does that hamper his chances at winning an MVP if like you're not playing 85 to 90% of the games? Obviously it's not like a requirement, but like it's something we do look at in terms of durability and being available every night. Cal, I'll flip it back to you since Henry started last time. You were kind of talking with me before we came on about maybe why Embiid shouldn't be as high on this list. So if you want to make that case here for everybody, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I'm not trying to say this to be disrespectful to people who are on Embiid's, bandwagon and want to, hail him up and deprive him of him being in a conversation as being an MVP candidate. Again, if you ask me right now, the numbers show that he should be an MVP candidate. But my argument is be prepared to be disappointed, unfortunately, because this is nothing new. What Joel Embiid is giving you right now is exactly what we've been saying he needed to be for the last 3-4 years. I think my greatest issue with why suddenly people have this need to propel him to this level is, yes, the numbers are gaudy. And finally, we've seen him step up on primetime TV against a team that has matchups that is actually supposed to challenge him. But if all we're going to go on with when it comes to Embiid and his ability to be an MVP candidate, and all I'm going on or all I'm riding on for his numbers go is every time he just beats up on the Boston Celtics, who they don't have a matchup for him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or he beats up on most teams in the Eastern Conference where he is always statistically should have a night like the nights that he's had in most cases, or has a nice favorable schedule for him to do what he's doing. That's not warming me to the idea of making him an MVP candidate.
And they have had a very, very easy schedule. This Lakers game notwithstanding, they've played,
exactly
Detroit. And even when they played Boston was not at full strength either. So I do agree with you on that.
And again, I'm not trying, to be Debbie Downer. I'm just trying to be realistic because I have wanted him to be an MVP candidate. I've said it on my podcast, with my boy Shaw, that for the Philadelphia 76ers to be anywhere in the conversation of getting to an NBA Finals, it will be on whether or not we're talking about Joel Embiid as an MVP. Now, I will say this much. It's because he is playing marketably better and has been doing it a little bit longer that the Philadelphia 76ers are among the top teams in the Eastern Conference. That's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But Joel Embiid's motor always becomes a question. He looks sharp in the beginning and then flames out in the end. Then you've got the whole thing with load management, which we've seen how Doc Rivers does that because he did that last year with the Los Angeles Clippers.
He's got some experience.
Right. So my whole thing is there are a lot of things that are still have to be considered before we just run right up and say, oh, Embiid's going to be able, to keep this up. No. Joel Embiid is putting up those kind of numbers that a big will be putting up. He's putting up the numbers that Giannis has been putting up. The difference is, what do those numbers look like against the competition for us to consider the Philadelphia 76ers as serious contenders coming out of the East? That is what I'm looking at when it comes to Joel Embiid.
Yeah, and that's fair. And like I said, we had this conversation offline before it started. So I definitely, agree with the schedule part of it. And the biggest question, I think, is the load management and will he have this, same level of play at the end of the year? You mentioned it.
I'll put it like this, Jordan. I'll put it like this.
Mm-hmm.
You have your rankings up right now.
I do. And I do have one now.
and again, people are going to take this as a diss. You take it however you want to take it. I'm keeping it 100.
Mhm.
I have more confidence that Jokic is going to wind up being a top 3 MVP candidate before this year's over with, before Joel Embiid. And again, I'm not saying that he's not capable of giving it. He's capable of doing it. But I think that there's too many factors, some of which is on his own volition, and a good portion of it is going to come down to where are the Philadelphia 76ers as far as them in the playoff picture, as far as where Doc Rivers is as load management goes with his star players, and where other guys in his position, what they're currently doing. If Jokic is continuing to post triple-double numbers, he is going to be a favorite to win the MVP, regardless of whatever Joel Embiid does. He would have to break some kind of significant record or number or do something crazy for a long stretch to leapfrog a guy like Jokic, who's constantly being put in that conversation to be an MVP coming out of the Western Conference, which is still considered the more challenging of the two conferences.
Yeah, agreed. And Jokic has proven that he can go, beginning to end of the season, these last 2 or 3 years, posting strong numbers, having his team in contention. So he does kind of have that already. I agree with you in the fact that Embiid still has to show that he can do that. However, it's nice to see that he's hitting some of those checkpoints. Like I said, I'm not saying
it's encouraging.
Yeah.
Encouraging.
Yeah, because it's what everybody's wanted, right? Like I'm not a Sixers fan in any way, shape, or form, but I've always told my Sixers friends, I'm like, you have to be frustrated watching Embiid because the potential is there, that he's been the potential guy, even amongst not that I give you guys a lot of credit, but the NBA TNT show, like Shaq and those guys, like Shaq's the guy who's challenged him in the past too, and was like, look, you've got all the physical gifts, like go out there and do it. And I don't think. I'm not comparing and saying that they're exact replicas, but the way Embiid is starting, at least, it reminds me of that 2000s Shaq season where he finally kicked into gear and was like, listen, I'm just going to kick everybody's ass all year long. But we got to, again, see if Embiid can do that the full year. It's a good start, though. We can kind of use that as a transition over to Jokic, who is obviously putting up he's just a ridiculous start. He's 25, 12, and 9 right now. Career high 57% from the floor, only shooting 33% from three, which just means that his field goal percentage inside of the three-point line is even higher. It's got to be up there 60%. Denver is off to a little bit of a rocky start. They've started to pick it back up in the last 2 weeks or so. They're 11-7. It's fourth in the West. 8-2 in their last 10. They've had some issues too with guys being out for COVID. Michael Porter Jr. was out with an injury. He's just coming back and starting to play well for them. So Jokic, to me, when I see him, one, if they didn't have Jokic and they had any kind of traditional center, they'd be in trouble because everything goes through Jokic, right? He gets the ball, he brings the ball up the court, he sets screens, he gets the ball, he runs screens as the point guard, ball handler. It's insane how everything in offense revolves around him. And it just seems like it's crazy. He seems like he has such a mastery of everything, and it's never fluid, right? You watch him and he's awkward, and he looks like this, big, tall European guy just wandered onto the court, and yet
clunky.
Yeah, it's hunky. He shoots these spinning one-legged fadeaways that you'd never teach your kid to do ever, and he just kind of barrels his head down in the lane sometimes and throws up these flip shots and stuff like that. But it works for him, and he's just been in total control on that end. His passing ability for that size, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that he's one of the 2 or 3 best passing big men that we've ever seen in this league. So that part's phenomenal. The shooting's gotten much better. He's also one of the best clutch guys. I think he's shooting the best percentage in the last 2 minutes of a game when it's tied. Over the last 2 or 3 years, he's ahead of everybody. LeBron, Anthony Davis, Kawhi, Kate, all those guys. He's ahead of everybody. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Did you have him on? Yeah, you had him 3rd. So you have him pretty high. I have him 2 right now. Or I have him 3. I'm sorry. Where did you have him? You have him 2. Okay, you have him 2. I have him 3. So we both have him pretty highly. Is this what he's doing right now? Is it sustainable for the whole year in terms of numbers wise, production, efficiency, or do you see a drop off coming for him?
Well, it's funny because Sean and I, in our previous episode, we had a little segment we call About That, Doubt That.
Mm-hmm. And, I like that.
One of the questions that was thrown out there is whether or not we believe that Jokic will finish the season, with a triple-double.
Mm-hmm.
Oz says he doubts that. And I said, I'm about that, right? I don't know what it is. I uniquely feel like Jokic is one of the few guys next to Luka Doncic that's capable of being able to do that thing, to be able to own that triple double if necessary. Now that, so that's the key. If it's necessary, we obviously see now he's kind of, taking a step back. As I think as far as assists goes, he's, just around 9 assists. And when we did the show, he was hovering around, I think he was hovering around 10.2 with things of that nature. Listen, a few games of him, just dishing the ball all over the place, because he's arguably one of the greatest, passing bigs of our generation right now. He can easily find himself in that conversation. I often find it that when you're an offensively good basketball team and you are the person who handles the ball as much as Jokic is being tasked to do for a struggling Denver Nuggets team, I think the assists come easy. It's his ability to rebound the basketball with consistency that I think at times may be a little harder, right? Because he's being asked to be out at the top of the key so much that he is not being levied to be down in the blocks and grabbing those rebounds. Then also, if you look at the way that the Denver Nuggets is the way that they shoot the basketball, that's something that can be desired at times. They could be a streaky team, even though they're an offensively good basketball team. So it'll be interesting to see if he's capable. I believe that he is. I think that if the Denver Nuggets are clicking on all cylinders, which they've shown us that this is not a fluke, that they've been doing this the last few seasons. If they are clicking on all cylinders, Jokic will be at the heart of it. And ultimately, he doesn't have to be averaging triple doubles like Russell Westbrook essentially was doing that. You can basically get through hovering around with the bare minimums, and you can fluctuate up and down, up and down. You never have to question him on the points, and he's going to be good for 10 rebounds. The assists always seems to be the caveat, and I think that's where Shaw was leaning on, the fact that he doubts that Jokic can keep that up. But I would probably argue, hey, that means that them boys need to shoot the basketball more, and those dudes need to step up and make their damn shots. You know what I'm saying? So the Denver Nuggets, you need to honor my about that, and let Jokic cook and give you the ball, and you make them damn shots.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think, too, the fact that, he's such a huge reason for their success. Jamal Murray is a guy that I'm, not really sold on. Yes, he's had flashes, obviously, but then he has a lot of games where he's, 6 of, 18 from the field in their primetime games.
As long as Bubble Murray is somewhere in there inside of him, ready to go when playoff time comes, I think that the Denver Nuggets are going to be, even though I would prefer to see Bubble Murray all season long, nice. Right? It would be really nice. But I think that everybody is pretty much rested in that, he needs to be summoned like Dragon Ball Z. Like, he needs to find his Super Saiyan. And when he gets into the playoffs, before we'll see that version of Jamal Murray. But tried and true Jokic is exactly what the Denver Nuggets are going to need to position themselves to make the kind of run that they made last year.
Right. And I think that, again, that speaks more to Jokic's MVP case during the season, because you don't have your second best player playing to his full potential necessarily every night. You have guys like Will Barton and Gary Harris who they've battled their injuries and stuff over the last year and a half. They're not quite the same players. Michael Porter Jr. kind of, question mark there, remains to be seen. Could be a very, very good talent. But we still have, more questions than answers with him. So I think is going to, I think it puts it in Jokic's favor. I agree with you. I think he's going to be, as long as he keeps, staying efficient.
But we can't agree, though. If Jokic winds up averaging a triple double and he doesn't win the MVP, there is something seriously wrong with the criteria for giving awarding MVP.
Especially as a center, I feel like everyone's underselling the fact that he's 7 foot 6'11" and flirting with the triple double. It's unreal. And I was looking at my notes before he came on, and I actually picked him to win last year, which turned out to be a year possibly too early. So I was definitely high on him last year. I thought he was going to do this year, what he's doing this year last year. So I was just a little bit early on that. So we'll see what he does there. I think there's only 2 guys left. Did we touch on Luka yet? I don't think we did.
Not too much. I mean, we kind of brushed over him a little.
Luka's kind of the same thing, right? I mean, he flirts with the triple doubles every night. Dallas has had a ton of COVID different, guys playing DNPs because of that, having to sit out protocols. Porzingis was obviously hurt, just getting back into kind of shape right now. So I think that they're still a question mark because we don't know what they're like at full force. We know Luka's impact, though, right? I mean, he's a wizard. He's a wizard with the ball. He could put up 35, 18, and 7 in a night, and just take over games. I think the discussion on him is like going to happen maybe more towards the second half of the season if Dallas can get their full lineup out there every night.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have Luka as a dark horse. Not dark horse. I mean, I kind of favored him to win.
I picked him to win it this year.
Yeah. And he's just had a slow start, and is there time left? Absolutely. I mean, right now the Mavericks are 7-7, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there's a player who can really just come out of the gate and just go ballistic, Luka Doncic could be the dude. And I mean, I'm saying that after he's only averaging 27 points, 8 rebounds, damn near 10 assists, right?
Right.
So the reason why we're not talking about him in the same way we're talking about Jokic is because he's struggling. He's only shooting 28% from 3.
Mm-hmm.
He's only shooting 46% from the field. And he seems to, I don't know if it's more so like he just had a bad off season or just mentally he's just not focused per se.
Mm-hmm.
Our attention's not being grabbed the same way it was grabbed when he, took the NBA by storm going into the All-Star break last season. That's just unfortunately what's happening. And I think that's part of the reason why everything is so monotone with our discussions and about MVP talks and stuff. Like, it's almost as if it's a blur that we already are into this part of the season. A quarter of the games have been played. And while we're talking about it because we know that we could be having this conversation, it doesn't feel like, the guys that we wanted to big up and really watch and keep an eye out are really elevating the conversations to such a high degree, which is opening the door for guys like Embiid and Mitchell, to jump into the fray, so to speak, because somehow we're still waiting for guys like Doncic to just like flip the switch and get us really all clamoring about talking about the MVP candidacy. I think it won't be until we get a little bit closer to, quote unquote NBA All-Star weekend or whatever the case may be, where we'll see the guys that we were predicting preseason, as far as being MVP, favorite MVP candidates are going to wind up being in that conversation again.
Yeah, and Luke is, like you said, Luke is the guy that can really flip the switch anytime he wants. It just seems like he's, it's a little bit shorter of an off season. Maybe he thought the season was going to start in January. It seemed like he was in the best shape to start here, but he's leaving 3 to 6 points a game on the table with that 3-point shooting. I mean, he gets that together, and you're looking at 33 points a game. He gets Dallas a couple more wins now.
He's only shooting 77% from the free throw line. I mean, just all of like the basic numbers that I really think really kind of bolster what he was giving us last season are just down right now. And I think it's just going to take a little bit of time for everything to kind of come together before we're back talking, Luka Doncic and, the same way that we're talking about the guys that we have right now in our top 5.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the guy that he's, kind of gets compared to sometimes for their passing ability and whatnot is the guy that we haven't discussed yet, which is LeBron James. Obviously playing for the Lakers. I'll update it for you because they're about to lose to Detroit, which is embarrassing. So they're going to be 14-6. Just a terrible fourth. They were like down like 3 going into the fourth. I think they're down like 15 now. So they're packing it in on this road trip. They're going to be 14-6, which I think is going to be 3rd in the West. They're 7-3 in their last 10. LeBron for the season, 26, 8-7, 50% from the field, a career high 41% from 3, which is encouraging for me as a fan, but also speaks to his improvement as a guy who came into this league without a big jump shot and has been able to work his way up now to being a pretty lethal shooter. The one thing too that's interesting, he's doing this career low, 33 minutes a game. So you look at the baseline stats that he has, they're on par with his career numbers. But theoretically, in another 4 or 5 minutes a game, he's leaving a potential triple-double out there. And that's, by design. Obviously, the Lakers are looking to keep him and Anthony Davis as fresh as possible as they make, it's a marathon, not a sprint for them, as they try to get ready to go to the playoffs and repeat there. What have you seen from LeBron? I mean, this is your 18 now. He's 36. It really is incredible. I've never been a LeBron guy personally, but I've come to respect his work ethic, the way he takes care of his body, the way he prepares for games. He's one of the smartest guys I've ever seen play basketball. And the fact that he's still able to do this and carry a team, and be honest, AD's kind of struggling. AD's had some really off nights. Mentally, I'm not sure if his head's quite all there right now, and LeBron has kept them afloat. You look at the Cleveland game earlier this week. Cleveland's been pretty tough defensively, and LeBron outscored them by himself in the fourth quarter and helped them, pull out a win there. So what have you seen from LeBron here in year 18? And, you got to assume that he's going to be in this conversation as long as he keeps these numbers up and does not get hurt. He should be in that top 3 discussion for pretty much most of the year.
If you're any of these other MVP candidates, or you're anyone who wants to play a very long and successful NBA career, invest in LeBron James being your fitness consultant.
$1 million a year in his body.
Yeah, it's a heavy price to pay, but you don't think that you know what I'm saying? He obviously is living proof that it works, right? So, what LeBron James is doing is phenomenal, and I guess it's unfair. You just basically come out the gate and you're dropping 25, 7, and 7. I think in most years that's always conversation, MVP worthy conversation talk, right? 25, 7, and 7. You get that from Bradley Beal. He's suddenly an MVP candidate, right? You get that from Dame Lillard, right? Like you're like, the Portland Trailblazers, maybe obviously a different basketball team. A different look, different feel, probably MVP conversation, but it's LeBron James. And I think because it's just that we're so used to seeing this time and time and time and time again, that you get LeBron James fatigue, because it just feels like he just does it in his sleep. So I think what's more amazing than anything is his defensive effort. To be doing what he's doing at age 36 defensively, I think is pretty remarkable. I mean, he has some pretty doggone good defensive statistics. He doesn't defend the same way that he did in his young career or when he was in those great runs as a Miami Heat. But given his position, given the responsibilities and what he does, you can make the argument that, his defensive metrics have improved playing next to Anthony Davis, and Anthony Davis in himself has elevated himself defensively because of playing next to LeBron James. So they're kind of simpatico right now. And I think you have to weigh that aspect of it if you want to really consider him as an MVP candidate. I just think that LeBron James right now is the total package. I don't know if he's going to keep it up, and I don't know if Frank Vogel is going to care to keep it up, right? Like, he's going to be like, hey, man, we're 5 games ahead in the Pacific, 5 games ahead in the conference. LeBron, I know you don't like it, but bro, you're going to sit this one out. You're going to sit a couple of these out, right? Like, and are we going to argue about that? No. He's always averaging in the upper percentile of games played in the regular season, right? He doesn't cheat you, unless he's severely injured. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm giving him the nod. He's the best player right now. He's an MVP candidate, no question at this moment. Maybe it's because some of the guys that I have favored are just struggling, haven't stepped up, or just maybe he's just doing it like he always does it. And right now in this moment, it should be magnified and it should be recognized properly, because it's exactly the reason why the Los Angeles Lakers are the best team in basketball. Well, going into the
going into Detroit.
We recorded this a couple of nights ago. They were the best team in basketball.
Yeah,
they've they struggle. They obviously decided to make it difficult for me to make that argument right now on your show. So my apologies.
That's okay. And I think there's 2 different mindsets about it too. Like Vogel, you talk about Vogel, and everybody in the front office there, they're going to be like, hey, play the long game, just get everybody to the playoffs, get everybody healthy. And you saw what they did last year, and you have to think that roster is technically improved from what we saw last season. I do think though, if you ask LeBron like in an interview, he'd be like, I don't care about that. I care about winning championships, which I obviously is 100% true. But I know he took it personally last year that Giannis got picked over him, and I think he used that in the playoffs. And he had one of his best playoffs that I've seen in a couple of years. And
the game that the Bucks played against the Lakers, to your point, where he just basically bombarded them with the 3-point shot.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I go back to the argument that one of the reasons why you cannot take LeBron James out of any MVP conversation is because when LeBron James plays in big games, it's not just, whether or not the Lakers are going to be first in their division or whatever. Big games mean being on primetime television, playing against people who are considered MVP candidates. And it doesn't matter what he says in order to psych himself into getting into that moment. It just is what it is. It's he knows the magnitude and the spotlight, and most oftentimes his game dictates the conversation. His game usually changes the narrative about how the MVP conversation is being made. He doesn't have to give a tweet. He doesn't have to give any post-game conference quotes. It usually comes down to what he does on primetime against whoever it is across the other side that apparently is going to be favored to win the MVP. He goes out there and puts the kind of performances that makes us question them, not LeBron James. And that's the reason why he's always in the conversation.
Yeah, and we go back to kind of what I talked about at the very beginning, the different things that the media looks for with their MVP, and one of them is narrative, and a couple of these guys do have a compelling one. LeBron also kind of quietly has one too, in the fact that he has not won one since 2012-2013 season. So we're going on, this would be year 8 of him potentially not winning an MVP. To put up the numbers he's putting up, to be doing all this stuff on both ends of the floor. I agree with you defensively. He's not the guy that he was 5, 6, 7 years ago, but I mean that's almost physically impossible to ask. But when he needs to guard guys,
a big reason why the Lakers are a top 3 team defensively. And yes,
he steps up a lot.
Anthony Davis is the number one reason, but just because he's the number one reason doesn't mean you don't give some credit to the guy who should be the second and possibly the third reason why they're among the best teams defensively. And LeBron James has to be a big reason for that, because he does play in a position that affords him the level of competition, playing next to Anthony Davis, that at times he, being the point forward, has to guard a backcourt player, has to guard a swing player. LeBron still is that kind of guy that will go out and he will do that. And so he's got to be recognized for that. And I'm not going to take anything away from that aspect of it. It's part of the reason why I probably wouldn't have wanted to have given him the MVP in previous years, because I felt like he's been able to kind of mask behind that. The same way that we chastise Steph Curry because he masked behind Klay Thompson. You can make the argument that LeBron James at times is masked behind some pretty good players and teams, specifically 3-and-D guys that are on his team. They go out there and take the bulk load of the D. But in this situation, if the Los Angeles Lakers, who haven't been known to be a top defensive basketball team in the same way of era of winning championships, not since Showtime and in the first few seasons when Kobe and Shaq were together. This is another moment where this is why we're talking about the Los Angeles Lakers in a window of maybe doing a dynasty if they can get this next championship. That if it's predicated of anything, everyone talks about how great they can look offensively and they razzle dazzle and they shoot it's their defense. And that's why Frank Vogel is there, because they wanted better defense, and you're getting from your 2 best players. And that's why you always have to put those guys in the conversation of MVP if they're doing top 2, 3 numbers defensively or offensively. Like we put Giannis and the Milwaukee Bucks because they're the best offensive team in the last couple of seasons, and his numbers bear that out. If you have the Los Angeles Lakers as one of the best defensive teams, and you look at who's run on that team, LeBron James and his numbers bear that out, and that's why he should always be considered as an MVP for that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, him and Jokic are the 2 guys that I think you can, I don't want to say lock in, but you can come as close to locking in them for the long haul in terms of being in this discussion at, the halfway mark, the 3/4 mark of the season, especially if, LeBron continues to do what we expect him to do. Obviously, they're in a little bit of a rut here, but we all know LeBron, is known to kick it up, especially with games. Yeah, I mean, it's bad loss tonight.
He's just toying with it, he's like, they're like experimenting. He's like, Who want to experiment? Who want to pull this experiment off with? Oh, we're playing against Detroit. All right.
Well, like you said, he's trying to get the team right, for the playoffs. And, I said, I'm sure they'll be fine. They're obviously competing. They realize that the Clippers, Jazz, and Denver, I think, are all huge threats this year, not just in the standings, but on the court. So I'm interested to see, they haven't played the Clippers since opening night. I don't know if they've played Utah yet. I think that's on the docket coming up soon, as well as Denver. So it'll be interesting to see, what he does in those games. Those will be some big primetime matchups for him. So we covered a lot today. Obviously, Henry had to bounce there a little bit during the show. But Cal, I appreciate you coming on. Do you want to give us? I'm going to leave you the floor here. Do you want to tell us, where we can find you social media wise? Tell us, about the Baseline podcast with you and Shaw. I mean, just let everybody know where we can find you at.
Absolutely. First, man, Jordan, thank you for having me on, and I'm glad to finally get the opportunity to jump on and stuff like that. The show that we have is called the Baseline NBA Podcast, or the Baseline. You can catch us at NBA Baseline is the show's Twitter handle. My Twitter handle at GameFaceLee. You can also catch my man Shaw, who is my co-host, at Shaw Sports NBA. So we love discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. As you can clearly see, the background effect is what happens when you are completely buried in the game. it becomes one of those where you're a mastermind genius trying to come up with the next show that the place just looks like a mess. But no, man, we love talking about the hot button topics of the NBA, man. And one of the things that we always want to try and do is continue to keep bringing up conversation that doesn't often get pushed by mainstream media as well too. Just kind of broadening the scope a little bit, opening it up a little bit. And it's not just talking about the current state of things going on in the NBA, but it's also with the culture. So, having great guests on and everything. And it's just been a blast, man.
Awesome. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Definitely check out the Baseline podcast for those of you who haven't. In terms of nuts and bolts, follow us on all our social medias. Check out our articles, podcasts, and live streams as well. We'll be back sometime next week. Talking more general NBA topics. And obviously, Cal will have you, and hopefully, Shaw will be great to have you both on at the same time as well.
Because then that would have been an extra 15 minutes of him about Embiid. Like, apparently, I'm an Embiid hater or something, but that's okay.
I want to hear that.
I'll leave that to my man to, state his arguments.
All right. Well, again, thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Have a good night.
Later, guys.